And please make this as interactive as you can. And so just so you know, someone said, oh, about being an expert. I am not an expert. What I'm trying to deliver is just kind of my experience with athletes with CP and with other impairments as well, or as we now see across the 35 to 38 class, it's neurological impairment. So kind of years ago they would have said about being CP, it's not neurological impairments that you'll hear people talking about all the time. Like I said, my name is Joe McDonnell, originally from Dublin. I went to university in Loughborough, worked in Walker's Crisps factory for 21 years, managed the plant. My role there was always around coaching and developing people. And that actually really helped me on the track, and the stuff that I learned on the track really helped me in business. So I've always coached. I coached for 20 odd years. I decided to retire a couple of years ago at 56 because I had the opportunity to. And so I'm going to say I coach full time. That's a lie. I do about 20 hours a week, which is really nice. So my experience with CP, I think the first CP athlete that I had was someone called Sam Ruddock, who was a T35. Who, and I will happily say, I kind of cut my teeth with Sam. I learned a lot about Sam because he was, his movement was very, very poor. And another thing I'll say is that with athletes with an impairment or with CP, as you would say about an able-bodied athlete that are all individuals, that is more so with athletes that have got an impairment or have got CP. They are all very, very different. So what works with one doesn't necessarily work with another. So this is a presentation that Sam Heathcote and myself put together. He's used it as part of a development that he's doing, trying to research into CP. So a lot of these slides are Sam's slides with some of the information on it, and some of them are mine. But it just gives you a bit of an insight into what we've learned over time. So, classification, if we start off with there, that's fairly easy. This is a really brief way of describing it, by the way. So, classification, T38, least affected, some coordination issues. T37, hemiplegic, single side affected. T36, involuntary movement, it can be quite a mixed class. T35, all four limbs affected. That's very generic. Yeah, but one thing I will say, it's an absolute minefield, because what you think you see and what they go and test for in the test table, if someone's going through classification, can come out very, very differently. And there are lots of traps in it as well. Some people have experienced that. I've had athletes go into classification and come out and you kind of scratch your head and you don't really understand why they've come to that decision. And that's kind of how, so classification is an absolute minefield. So to give you a little bit of an insight, here's a very heavily laden, worded. So the thing that's really, so International Paralympic Committee defined the classification on their website, July 2016, as coordination impairments, hypertonia, ataxia, and atosis. So that's your T38 class, minimal hemiplegia, ataxia, diplegia. T37, moderate. T36, these athletes do not have the capacity to remain still and they show involuntary movements. So that's very classic of a T36 athlete. T35, the athletes may need assistive devices for walking. They don't always do, but they tend to be show the most signs of tiptoed walking, spasticity, things like that. So I'm not going to go through all of those. And just so that, again, is just a brief cover of what they believe each class is. And that's what makes it a minefield, is that it's very easy for some of these, especially the 36 to 38, 35 to 30, it's very easy for them to overlap a bit. And so you...
No, sorry, finish with it.
Sorry, I thought you put your hand up.
No,
if you want to go to the toilet at any stage, just go.
No, just to come in when you're ready.
So, like I said, it's a minefield because they can cross over. T37, actually, that tends to be fairly specific. Yeah, because it's the one that's hemiplegic, single side affected. If you look at some of the French athletes, Georgie Hermitage, it's very, very obvious when you look, you kind of go, bang on, they're 37. So that's the only one right now. So I used to say that the T35 class, you could look and go, well, someone that's a T35, Sam Ruddock, he was kind of very spastic, very towed, his knees were very in. But you didn't actually see it in his hands until you put him under stress. Then as soon as he'd start to try and run quick or get under any sort of stress, you see his fingers kind of do this as he ran. So then you started to see how it was affecting all 4 limbs.
Is this very subjective in the eyes of the person who does the classification?
I'm not a classifier.
No,
so
one man's T37, maybe another man's T30, or a woman's T30.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. I do think they make mistakes. Genuinely think they make mistakes. But sometimes you have to trust in the process and go, will they reverse some of that mistakes?
You see, we think these are synonymous with CP, but there are people categorised in these 4 categories, use the word again, who aren't CP.
Yeah, absolutely. So in there, it doesn't say anything about having cerebral palsy.
No, doesn't know.
Because it's a neurological disorder classes. So within your T38 classes, you've got Kadina Cox. Kadina Cox has got MS. You've got Ali Smith. She's got MS. In the T38 class, you've got Margarita Goncharova. She's Russian. I'm sure they'll be coming back in for probably the Worlds or after that. She had a stroke and had, I think it was a brain tumour, and then that put her into that class. Hippolito, the Brazilian girl, same thing, had a stroke, and so she went into the 38 classes. Sometimes people with really severe MS end up in the T36 classes because there's a lot of involuntary movements. So you do see a lot of people, again, the T37 classes, I think is very specific because you look and you can see and it becomes very obvious. But T35, T36, T38, you're absolutely right. It's neurological impairment. So understanding that, and hopefully you see on some, because I've downloaded some races, and where you can just quickly have a look at them, and sometimes for me it becomes very obvious when you see people when they're at kind of maximum velocity and peak, you can see where their stride length changes. So if they've not got cerebral palsy, if they have a different impairment, the gait becomes a bit different and they hold it much better. That's just what I think I see. So be interesting to see what you see. So you're absolutely right. It's not cerebral palsy. It's neurological disorder. But our athletes that have got cerebral palsy all fall into these classes. Or if some T35 athletes, if they're severe enough, even though they become a T35, can go into the T34 and go into a chairing race. Yeah. So I'm going to have to do it like this. Let's start for. It worked earlier on. I swear it did, honest to God.
2 world records at the track. It's 400 metres.
So Sophie Hahn is this one here. So this is 5 years ago. So she's starting.
Behind on the inside, has had the benefit of seeing everything else unfold in front of her, which at the moment involves Goncharova going off like a train on the back straight, and she is leading at the moment, and Strizak of the Ukraine is going with her. And those two are currently in a race of their own on the backstroke for gold and silver. And Sophie Hahn doing her best to try and keep up in lane 3. But at the moment, it is Goncharova of Russia and Strizak of the Ukraine as they come around the bend towards the home straight. And Goncharova at the moment is heading for the gold medal of the Games in both track and field. It's been a remarkable sequence from her.
So if you look at the gait on Sophie Han on this, and this Portuguese athlete back here,
That's wonderful.
yeah. So there's minimal impairment. So like I said, Margarita Goncharova had a stroke. Sophie has got CP. And one of the reasons I put the 400s on, it becomes very obvious when you've got an athlete that's got CP, because they do look like they've been shot by the time they get to the end. And as you go down through the classes then, I'm not sure by saying they look like they've been shot is correct, by the way. But I think
you're far wrong.
But I think you get me drift.
I think that's the same for everyone.
Yeah. So this is what I mean about the T37s being very specific, and I don't think it's going to take.
37. This is for cerebral palsy runners, and Lisa McIntosh is the world record holder.
It's not going to take much explaining.
So far this season, she qualified with a personal best as she slaved something for the final. We're getting some in a standing position. It's a matter of choice, and they're off. It's the women's 200-metre final, T37. This is the cerebral palsy runners, and Joanna Benson in the blue.
You'll see more. So you see the arm on the right-hand side.
On the inside,
the French girl.
Benson's going extremely well.
But,
on the outside, the Ukrainian girl, Krechniak, is going very well. It's Krechniak of the UK.
So it becomes really obvious.
Namibia's coming back. Here comes Benson. Benson from Namibia, absolutely flying.
You can see it's very specifically single-side affected, which is what makes the T37. It's probably now one of the easier ones you can look at and you go, T37.
The call for the Rocks.
Well, we have
Benson timed that beautifully.
Philip in that category over here.
Yeah. So he would be what I'd call bloody talented, but a top-end T37.
Yeah.
But he still has that issue. And he's a very well-trained athlete. I watched him at the World Championships in London last year. And I forget who it was. I forget there was some athlete that just went off for the 400 like a rocket and tried.
I know who it is.
Give us a secret.
Is it your boy Roger? No, it's the Canadian.
It's the Canadian, the ex-footballer.
Was it the 800 or the 1500?
That was a 15.
Was it a 15?
An Australian one off.
No, it was your boy.
I know with Killip came back.
It was Weinberg.
And he absolutely threw wobbly in the Irish tent. He went absolutely mad. So, so T36, some of it is severe, some of it is not so severe, but you can see there's a lot of, especially when they get into the start position, if you have a look, there's a lot of involuntary movement.
John in 5, Oliveira Cruz in 6, Saidi in 7. So where we go, it's the top 3.
So if you look at the Brazilian girl, and gets to about 60 metres, if you look at the way her stride length changes. So again, the T36 for me becomes, I'm not a classifier, but it's one of the things again that I look and I think sometimes it's very obvious when someone's a 36, and I think it's very obvious sometimes when they get it wrong.
That was a fellow dub of yours commentating there.
Was it?
Will Downing.
You've been looking at my presentation.
Dublin bias.
So here you go, T35.
And they're away, Hopkins away well in the outside lane, on the inside there.
So Isis Holt, that's in front,
Who's also done
had a stroke
raced up there.
in the T35 class.
2 at the moment between Hull out there.
Maria Lyle,
And Greg Green,
to
lane 6 for the time.
cerebral palsy, all 4 limbs affected.
To victory here at the present time. She's way out in front. in second place, 28.57 for Isis Holt. It won't be a world record because of the wind factor at present, but it is
So very, very different.
from Isis Holt. Real love is
So one of the reasons for showing that, I think sometimes when you watch the races, you get a better idea of where the differences are. And for me, you can also see where it becomes very different. So where Sophie Hahn is very different to watching Maria Lyle run, and why there's a difference, are very different to watching Georgie Hermitage run. So from a non-classified trained eye, sometimes you can go, well, I think they're in that class, but then by the time they get in, have you been through a classification?
Oh yeah.
What's it like in there?
Oh, it's tiring.
Do you want to explain what you do, if you don't mind doing that?
They do a lot of. The last time we got it done earlier this year up in Belfast, it was an external coming over just to pretty much check their notes and everything like that. But a lot of bounding, a lot of coordination, counting your strides in between it, and then as you got more fatigued, they counted your stride and they just said, like, try and get from this point to that point with the same amount of steps. But the more tired you got, the harder it got, harder, and your stride length just completely changed by the end of it. And they based it off that kind of thing of how tired you were and how much it actually changes by the end from the start of it. And then they do a lot of things like your hands, your feet, obviously your hands, feet, hand-eye coordination, bit of everything, and then balance and bounding and bouncing and things like that. It's
So just sorry, what's your name?
Connor.
Connor said, just what Connor said, it's physically tiring and it's mentally tiring. It's also very emotionally tiring as well for a lot of people, because for a lot of people there's a lot riding on that, you know. So and again, sometimes they get it wrong, and somebody asked a question, I think it was you, said, is it kind of subjective? I think sometimes, so Eve has been through classification at Notwell, was told one thing, goes to Berlin, gets told something else. So in reality what should happen is, what A sample found here, B sample should have found exactly the same thing. You know, so I know what I think, you know what I think, you know what I think, and you know what I think. So, but I think Eve is very, very talented, and I think sometimes that confuses them, genuinely. But that's only my opinion, by the way.
But those Australians are red hot. You wouldn't think they had any symptoms at all.
Well, but you got to remember. So this is an individual that has got. So if you look at Isis Holt has had a stroke. She's got neurological disorder that puts her into that class because of something that has been done to her. So if you think if Isis Holt was a junior athlete up until the time she was 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and she'd been training at a local club, doing whatever, probably not the fastest 14-year-old in the club, there's a certain amount of memory within there that's just going to be held on to. Eve, you were born with CP,
yeah.
I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, when you train with a CP athlete, and we'll get onto it in a bit, you have to start changing the difference between what is poor movement because the individual has got CP. None of us have got the gift of God that we can cure people, a CP, so there's a certain amount of poor movement and involuntary movement that you're going to have to deal with that athlete. There's also a lot of poor movement that's been learned because your body is adjusted over time. And I'm going to guess the majority of people that have got an impairment probably didn't do as much sport as their counterpart because they were probably last to be picked, or whatever. They probably didn't go and play football, or probably didn't go and do whatever. So you don't really have that natural training base they have when you're a kid. So
And they're causing it more by their parents as well because of their disability.
Well, I don't know. There's a question to you.
On a day-to-day basis, no. I mean, we help Eve with stuff that she doesn't need help with sometimes.
I'm not talking generally, not specifically Eve Walsh down.
I don't think so, no. I think any parent that's got a child with a disability, you're proud of every step that they take, and you don't want to hold them back. And
But you're not a bit more protective than you
no, I don't think so.
Yes.
Well, you may feel I restrict you sometimes, but that's.
Well, I'm thinking not so
Yeah.
much you as a coach. I'm thinking about Eve and her parents. You know,
Well, I am Eve's father.
I beg your pardon.
No, I'm really pleased that they don't look alike.
Yeah.
That she looks more like a mum, because that's a good thing.
No, I'm Eve's dad. Roger's Eve's
No, I know
dad.
Roger. Yeah.
So no, I don't treat Eve any differently to my other children.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think you'll find, so I think if we look at people that are older than Eve, even though she's very, very young, so I think that there was a generation where they did do that. I think you're right, but I think the younger generation, the people that are kind of Sam Ruddock, who's mid-20s, Eve, who's kind of mid-teens, I think because I think parents generally did go, get on with it. Go and do whatever you need to do and just go on with it. But that still doesn't mean they had the same probably natural training base that the blokes that, or the girls that went in with the friends and did whatever. I think it's very, very different. And as you'll see as we go through this, so the questions that I've got here, what was my approach? So I had to, like I said, I cut my teeth with Sam Ruddock because I had to go back and learn about someone with cerebral palsy or someone with a neurological disorder, because I genuinely didn't know. So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase of being unconscious competent or unconscious and incompetent. I was all of those with Sam Ruddock. I didn't know why I was getting him to do what I needed him to do because I didn't understand what I had, but I was getting him to do stuff that apparently shouldn't have been able to do. So a lot of the hurdle drills that I take you through. So Sam is very severely, he's at bottom end T35. So when we were in Berlin actually, and he did his classification, and I think this was 2014, the classifiers asked if they could come and video Sam doing the hurdle exercises because they'd never seen anyone as a T35 that had cerebral palsy being able to do what he did. And he said, how did you manage to do that? And I genuinely went, I asked him. And that was, I could only say, well, we got someone to demonstrate and he went and did it. So there's a certain amount of just giving people hard work sometimes to go and do and challenging them, because you're never going to find out at what level the impairment and the poor movement is due to the neurological disorder and how much of it is just poor learned movement. And trust me, there's a lot of poor learned movement. So what had been my approach, what was the process, and what did it make me consider, and what new approaches will I take? So approach to training. So it's really some interesting stuff. So work capacity and tissue tolerance. So tissue tolerance and the work capacity for somebody that's got cerebral palsy means that they fatigue much quicker than someone that hasn't got cerebral palsy because of the amount of energy that's expended whilst they're trying to do something. So if I was doing a quad exercise, right, my hamstrings would probably be quite loose and I'd be fine. If you've got cerebral palsy and you're doing a squat and you're working your quads, your hamstrings take a lot more of the load than someone that hasn't got cerebral palsy. So the energy used just to stabilise that muscle to get you to do it is massive. So toning, yeah. So if you can get the core muscle temperature above 35 degrees or around at 35 degrees, you're much more elastic. So this, and I'll go into it in a bit, so a bit of work that I did with Sophie Han around using heated trousers and using some neurological activation made a huge difference. And it's not rocket science, and it's stuff that anyone can go away and do and sort out and get to use for their athletes. So work capacity, tissue tolerance, force production, technique and movement efficiency. So like I said, there's a lot of poor learnt movement, and it's about getting rid of that poor learnt movement and being left with what you've got, poor movement because of CP. Because if you do that, you know exactly the package that you're dealing with. So in terms of sprint performance, this is exactly the same whether you've got CP or whether you've not. So these are all the things that's expected. The ability to produce high mechanical power and output during ballistic push-off, sprint accelerations, and maximum velocity. Generate high levels of force, apply with effectiveness to your environment, so depending on what you're running on, produce this force at high velocity. So sometimes what you'll find with people with cerebral palsy, and if you look at some of the video that I showed you, you'll see that the people that had got cerebral palsy started to lose the ability to produce high force at maximum velocity. Yeah, the people that haven't got CP, that have got a neurological disorder that's been caused by a stroke or MS, whatever it is, don't necessarily lose that ability to produce force at high velocity. So there is a difference. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So, T38, 100 and 200 metres. Classification suggests athletes have clear evidence of hypertonia, ataxia and or orthosis. On physical assessment, that will affect running. Coordination impairment is mild to moderate and can be one of the 1 to 4 limbs. So a T38 athlete potentially could have very mild problems in all 4 limbs, but they could still be deemed to be a T38. Coordination and balance are typically mildly affected. So what I've seen with the athletes that, and even through the talent program where British Athletics, where we've got a lot of athletes coming in, and the ones that have got CP, the very first, Roger, you've been there. So the very first thing that we look at is balance. Can you stand on one leg? Can you step over a hurdle? Can you hold a bar above your head and walk and hold a position? So I've got able-bodied athletes in my group that it takes me time to get them to do that. So if I've got someone that has got a neurological disorder, CP, guess what? I get them to do it until I get to the point that they can do it. Because if they can hold balance, it means that as they hit the floor, they're going to be able to produce more force. They're going to have more balance as they produce that force. That doesn't mean that you can cure the CP, just means that you train away all that really poor learnt movement. Any questions on that? So this is an athlete. So year 1, movement, control, functional movement. That's literally what I did for year 1. And not just me, Sam Heathcote as well. That's literally what we did year 1 with Sophie Han. We literally stripped everything back and we went, can I get this athlete to move as functionally as possible? Can I get them to have balance? Can I get them to have a rhythm? Can I get them to have coordination? That's all I wanted to do, to the point where they were able to hold that position that I wanted them to hold, or not, because CP or neurological disorders wouldn't allow them to do that. Year 2, movement, control, functional movement. Year 3, functional movement, strength development. It was year 3 before we felt that we were able to get the athlete to a position where they were balanced enough that we were able to put them through some sort of strength development program. Because if someone can't balance, it's very difficult to get them to do some specific movements in the gym. And as I go further through, I'll explain some of it to you. Year 4, strength development, tissue tolerance. So we're talking about, year 4 with this athlete before we really start looking at how much can I push this athlete to levels of fatigue that may cause. So for me to understand where, because up until that point I was getting rid of poor movement. I was getting rid of poor learned movement. I believed I got to year 4 and I got to the point where I'd kind of done as much as I could to get rid of the poor learned movement, and now I was working, the majority of what I was working with was the poor movement or the poor coordination due to cerebral palsy. It was at that point then that the program kind of changed, and I was able to push the athlete to the point of fatigue. So if we were doing 12 150s off 2 minutes, so that means basically you shout go, you start your clock, whatever time they've got left in that 2 minutes and 90 seconds, that's what they had as rest. So Sophie Han would get to about number 5, and then she'd have some real problems and pain through her adductors. Sean Burrows, it'd get to about 6, and he would just basically not have a fit, but he'd get really wobbly and really shaky. I've got a young chap that's with me at the minute. He was a swimmer coming into athletics called Ben Foulston. He gets to about 3 or 4 and he breaks down. Now, you need to find out, like I said, it's very individual. You need to find out at what point does that athlete then just have that point where you have to give them that extra rest. Because I tell you what, you give them a couple of minutes or 3 minutes extra rest, which is basically miss the next run, and they're back on it again, and they can go and execute. Some of the danger with that is if you overdo it and you allow that atosis to really kick, where there's that involuntary shaking that you get, that can be massively detrimental. So if you take 150s as an example, what I tried to do for the first 4 years with Sophie was literally get her to run as far as I could get her to run, so she could maintain a posture and maintain some form that she could do what I wanted to do correctly. And as soon as that really started to break down, the option was to do 1 or 2 things to stop her at that point, which could have been 60 metres, it could have been 80 metres, it could have been 40 metres, or pull the tempo down a bit so she could finish it in a slower time but maintain the correct form. I went for slowing it down a bit and getting her to maintain the correct form. And that paid massive dividends because it also built a really good engine for that individual as well. And that's not rocket science, by the way. You're all coaches. You're all going, yeah, well, we do that anyway. But, you know, an athlete with CP, it's about finding out for that individual where their tolerance levels are.
Form's paramount. Running.
Absolutely. And the worst thing you can do, so if you think about, if you've got an athlete and you go, and I'm quite happy to show you the kind of last year's program that I've had and kind of what we're doing this year. The worst thing that you can do is say to someone, right, we're going to do, I don't know, 10 reps or 60 seconds, all right, brilliant. And then after 20 seconds, they run really poorly. So for me, they've ran 20 seconds really well, and they're going to perform 40 seconds of that really, really poorly. So at that point, am I promoting poor learned movement? And I'm sure we've all got different, you know, approaches to it, but that's kind of what I do. I'd rather have really good executed movement overall rather than really poor learned movement overall. Because I think the more you do the poor learned movement, I think the more that confirms in your brain, well, that's the way I need to run. That's the way I need to run. So year 5, strength development. So we've got to the point, so Sophie Han started off with a bar, being able to do a front squat. To this day, still cannot do a back squat. I'll show you our body position in a bit, and you'll go, okay, I understand that why. She can do a front squat. Started off with a bar, 15k bar, 20k bar. She can now front squat 85 kilos. She weighs 47. So she can, we know she is strong, and it helps her produce force. When I go through the force velocity curve, I'll explain some of it on there. So, training methods. So I said about heat and activation and tissue tolerance. So if you're cold, if your core muscle temperature is cold, so if you haven't got an intellectual, neurological impairment, or you've got cerebral palsy, your muscle tissue is going to get very cold very quick. And for you to warm that up and activate and get the neurological pathway to work, it's going to take time. And you need heat and you need activation. If you're able-bodied, you can go and do some runs, do some jumps, and you can activate stuff fairly quickly. Cannot necessarily do that with CP athletes. because it doesn't work. So what happens is they go run and they will tear muscle tissue. So exactly as I described earlier on, we're going to go and run and do whatever. It's not just one group of muscles that's going to work. Everything works. So your fatigue levels are massive, your toning becomes massive, you get really tight, your stride length shortens, risk of injury. So I don't know if you've seen on the velodrome when they're warming up on the bikes and you see them in those trousers. Did you use the trousers last year in Berlin?
I don't think so.
No. So Sophie Hahn, so we, who knows, I don't mean Michael Johnson, the sprinter, who knows Michael Johnson, the S&C bloke that's over in Loughborough, and Rob Miller, the S&C, both from Northern Ireland, they're both from here actually. So we did a bit of work with Sophie Hahn 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when we start looking at, we felt the functional movement and the strength development phase was in, you know, what can we do around increasing the elasticity of muscle and get it to work even better? And so we know heat works for athletes with CP. If you send them to a warm weather training, they train better, they feel better, everything's looser. You'll see the stride length looks very, very different. How do I replicate that in Loughborough in December or in January? It's really, really difficult. So we did a battery of exercises around putting on some heated pants. So we used, so Sophie Hahn is very structured in the way that she does things. So we used it as a call room exercise. And again, this was a trial. It was never planned to work like this. It was just something that kind of fell into our hands because this is how we could measure it and trial it. And we got her to warm up normally, put heated pants on, and she sat there for 20 minutes and she did some jumps. Then we got her to again warm up correctly at a different time, put the heated pants on, do activation jumps every 5 minutes. So now we were firing stuff neurologically, we were switching everything on neurologically every 5 minutes. No, call-up rooms are generally 20 minutes, so we said we'll do 5 jumps before you go in, then every 5 minutes in there until you're told to take your stuff off. It was May 17th at the LIA, the first time we went and kind of put it into practice and really thought we'd get some numbers from it, and she broke the world record. And I genuinely believe that because that process really worked for her, and she uses that process every time we go now, to the point where, I didn't know whether you'd use it or not, so you'll see a lot of the British athletes from the para side, they will want, especially the CP athletes, they will want those heated pants. They don't all use the process that Sophie has used, which I think is where they're not seeing the benefit of it, because it's about the heat and about the neurological firing. You know, you can get hot, if you're not neurological firing, if you're a CP athlete, it's not going to happen. You can neurologic fire, but you need some, so you've got to do a bit of both and get it done.
Well, can you extrapolate from that
Extrapolate's a very big word. I can't even spell that. Okay, go on.
Extrapolate. But seriously, I mean, can you extrapolate from that T38, T37, T36 athletes actually perform better in competition when the temperature's a lot warmer than
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll bet me more. Well, I haven't got a mortgage, but I'll bet me house on it.
But explain performances here as well.
It's massively different.
A lot more, but it's a whole day and you just don't get them.
But then, so knowing that the case that is something that works, how can you replicate that no matter where you go?
Yeah.
Now, the other key fact with that is, so when we were in Brazil and it was 37 degrees, Sophie still went in and wore her heated pants. Because that whole process of going doing the same thing time after again. You know, when she went to...
You wouldn't change your routine.
Absolutely, you wouldn't change the routine, but just because it's hot doesn't mean that your core muscle temperature is really hot. And quite often you go into a call room and you go in and sit there and they do really nice things like put air conditioning in it. So it's 37 degrees outside. You go into the call room, you're like that, and you go, I'm bloody freezing, because they're trying to cool it down for everybody. Our athletes that have got cerebral palsy go and switch it off. So going through the same process every time. So again, through understanding heat and activation and tissue tolerance, strength training, increased force production during isometric testing. So I had a quick look downstairs with Tom. I think the isometric testing are pretty standard. You just haven't got a split plate, have you?
Ask these guys. Yeah. None's coming in.
He said yes, he has. He didn't say when he has, but he did say he has. Increase squat and deadlift load. Now, specifically around squat and deadlift. So this is around Sophie Han. Speed training, ability to run at increased velocity. So these are some numbers from Sophie Han. None of this is that impressive, by the way, just so you know. So peak force, not that impressive. Being able to jump 52.5 centimetres, and none of it on a counter movement jump, none of it is really that impressive. What is impressive is when you get down here and you have a look at our contact time.
Yeah.
So our contact times are really good, right? And then over here, you know, strides per second. So an elite athlete will be hitting just over 5, an elite able-bodied athlete. So even though some of this stuff, when you looked at an able-bodied elite athlete, so
Her running efficiency stands out
massively. It's not. It's her efficiency, but also her ability to produce force at maximum velocity. Yeah. That's the key thing. But it took 5 years. You know, it took 4 years to get to that point, and a lot of that was because you started work with an athlete to reduce the poor learned movement, and you work on what you've got from a CP point of view, and then how can I maximise that? And that becomes really hard work for the athlete, because they're now having to really challenge themselves every time that they go and do.
Or step frequency, cadence.
Yeah. So like I said, some of it is not, you know, front squat 80 kilos. So like I said, this was a presentation that we put together a while ago. That's now 85. Hex bar deadlift, 85. 1.7 times our body weight. So Sophie Han went to Swansea, the race that I showed you in the 400. She went to Swansea weighing 47 kilos. Didn't like the food, didn't like the person she was sharing the room with. Came back 42.4. And she ran about 0.7 slower for 100, ran over a second slower for a 200, and then she should have won that 400, and she was 20 metres behind. So again, these are just some numbers, just to give you an idea that sometimes with your athlete that have got a neurological impairment or CP, trying to measure them, you should measure them because you need to understand where that athlete is, but it's very hard to compare them to anything. Some of the stuff that we've got, actually a CP athlete, if you look at the numbers, are probably more aligned to a 400 metre or an 800 metre runner than if they're a 1 and 200 metre sprinters. So Sophie's numbers, if I looked at a 400 metre or an 800 metre athlete, I could probably look and see some similarity there, but not against a 1 and 200 metre runner. So Daryl Nita, or there's a young girl in my group called Amy Hunt, I was saying to Tom earlier on, you know, she'll jump 68.72, you know, for counter movement jumps. Daryl Nita jumped 78. You know, so you can't really compare. But when you come and have a look down here,
that's the key.
Yeah. And again, this is individual, you know. So build up to Tokyo, you know, what we were looking at. Increase force production, strength training through to April 2019. Maintain tolerance to training. So we've got, like I said, I believe we've got to the point where Sophie is now, I'm going to use the word a trained athlete, and we've got rid of all that poor learned, or the majority of the poor learned movement. We're really focusing now on making the athletes much stronger. Ability to produce force at speed. So I've got in there Olympic lift variations. You'll see some pictures of Sophie in a sec. There's no way I could get Sophie to do a clean. So that can't be put into a program. She'd struggle to do a pull. just simply because the position that she got her body into. But she can front squat, and a lot of us around to athletes that have got a neurological impairment or have got cerebral palsy sometimes don't understand where the body is when they're moving, if that makes sense. Because they think it's one thing, and because the message is so slow, it's doing something else or doing something different to what they think is. So I use a lot of med ball stuff. I think we've done some of what you did with med ball throws and that. I use a lot of jumps onto maybe 40 or 60 centimetre boxes, and then from there jumping off onto the pole vault bed. So just stuff like that, just to try and increase some sort of training with jump variations. Some of it is trying to mimic what I will get, what I'd expect to get if I was trying to do cleans as well. So trying to fill the gap. So I know that Sam Heathcote can make Sophie very strong because he proved it. He's got a front squat on 85k. You know, he's done amazing work with her. I know the stuff with the medicine ball works, with the jumps works, with the throws works, and the speed strength stuff. You know, the stuff I do on the track, if I go back one. So you can see there's some, and I think we probably all use them as coaches, do we? So we use them quite a bit. I know that I can make it quicker on the track doing stuff. What I can't do with Sophie is around this strength speed stuff. That's the bit that she really struggles with, because she finds it difficult to get into the right positions to do that. So we have to then kind of step away and go, how can I vary it? What could I get the athlete to do differently? So we are going to try some clean pulls, see how that works. So some of it is a bit suck it and see, to be honest with you, trying to find some that works for that particular individual. And this is what makes athletes with a neurological impairment or cerebral palsy very individual. And you have to go away and probably do some stuff that's a bit unconventional as well. Oh, go back. What do you think, Mr. S&C? What did you think? Mr. S&C, do you like that? So that was once I couldn't find the footage of when we literally had her with a bar and she looked like she was going to fall over, and we literally have got footage of that. So potential issues: coordination impairment, time, ability to learn lifts. So the reason that I put time in there, as Eva's experience and Sophie's experience and a lot of athletes have experienced, when you go through the para route, getting to a point where you're potentially pulling on an international vest is very quick. So I would guess that there's very little or no athletes that are going through the Olympic pathway that decide to go down to tractor training in January, and then the next January they're going off to somewhere to go and run an international event with a GB vest on. I'm going to guess that doesn't happen. Does any of you know of anyone that happened with?
It happens all the time, doesn't it?
Looking at some of them run, it probably does. But it doesn't happen. Yet the athletes that are para-athletes end up on a very big stage. And unfortunately, that early in your career, that's when you're making all those mistakes. So now you're putting in front of a massive audience in the very early learning stage of your career. And the temptation sometimes is to go, this athlete's coming in the year one, and all of a sudden they're an international athlete, and they see all these people doing all these fancy moves and stuff, and you go, but I don't care what they're doing, you still have to walk down here. So the temptation is to move people on too quick. So like I said, with Sophie, even though year one, she broke a world record within 4 months of her going to learn to run and have a bit of balance, there was no point in me saying, oh brilliant, and I'll move you onto here. It still took 4 years to get to a point, because she's going to develop, she's going to get better. But the only way that we could have some real sustainable results was to go through the process and structure of, this is still a very young athlete, there's still the movement, even though they move quick for their classification, the movement is still very poor. We still have to base it on the basic fundamentals of what I want that individual to achieve and what's best for that individual, and to what point do you move that individual on. Because I think there's a lot of observation where you look and people just move on too quick and then they get injured or whatever, and you don't ever want that. Your athlete, the best athletes in the world are the ones that can stay injury-free as long as possible. Dumbbell variations. So this is one of Sam's. Movement and control with med ball and jump. So we process that quite a lot, looking at head position and using the med ball so we get as much work through the hips as possible. Increased jumping, poor learned or inherited mechanics, we've already spoke about that. You know, increasing bone stress, robustness of the athlete. So you do that over time. You can't expect an athlete, like I said, all of a sudden they're running down the track with their friends and then next year they're running in Berlin at the European Championships or they're running in Notwell at major championships. That's massive. Weighted jump sprints. So how do we know if we're achieving overload? So this is, go back. Literally where we kind of started Sophie off. Because she didn't have the coordination. Oh no, we're turned sideways and I couldn't get it to fix. So you're going to have to turn your heads. Literally how we got her to start. Because she literally couldn't coordinate. If I said, put a little bit of a bounce into that, forget it, it wasn't happening. So everything. By the way, she'd already broke the world record twice at that stage. But there was no point in going, oh, well, let's move on and doing something else. But you do get to the point where you do just want to bang your head because you come up against that many different challenges that you've got, because you'd have to kind of think, and I don't mean outside of the box, but sometimes you can't move at the speed that you'd like to move because you can only move at the speed that the athlete's capable of moving at that particular time. Or the groups that they're training with and they see some of their groups doing stuff. It's that bit of peer pressure around, well, I'd like to go and do that, and you go, yeah, but you can't, because actually I need you to do this, because if I don't teach you to do this, at some stage that's going to hurt you. Whereas if I teach you to do this and we take it in small steps, by the time you get there, you're going to be strong, you're going to be robust, you're going to be capable, and then we can kind of move on from there. So what was the process? I missed it twice. Look. What was the process made me consider? How was my background in people management also embedded, and also being embedded in the sport helped? I think from managing people in a plant where people come to work and you can't always get people to come and give 110%. So you have a process and a structure at work where you get people to go through. So actually my job when I started at Walkers was a process manager. So I dealt with everything from potatoes coming in to going to the packaging and getting flavoured and going into a bag. And there was a process and a structure to that, and each thing had a step. You know, the potatoes came in, they got washed. They came along a flume, they got sliced, they got washed again, they got fried. They came out, they went up an elevator into a flavouring system, got flavoured, went into a bag. They were weighed before they went into a bag, so we knew we had the right way. So there's a process and structure to everything. And I think as long as you can do that with what you're doing with your athletes with CP, and keep it process orientated and keep it structured, the outcome will take care of itself. Again, para-athletes end up on an international stage. It's too quickly sometimes. It's great because it's a nice fast route into, you know, getting funding or whatever it is, but it's very, very quick. And sometimes itself that can be detrimental. So that really helped me when I was looking at how I would structure plans for athletes, ensuring that I always looked at a process and a structure. I never tried to jump on, and always made sure that I didn't. So when you're making crisps, each time that something finishes a process, so when it gets fried, it stays there for 3 minutes to 3 minutes and 16 seconds. That's how it works. When it comes out, it's tested by a piece of kit to see how much oil is in that crisp and how much moisture is in that crisp. If there's just too much oil or too much moisture, it gets dumped. So that part of the structured and process hasn't worked. So if you're training an athlete and you're trying to get them to do some sort of functional movement, you kind of have to stick with it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And once they get it, or they get to sometimes what I call, look, that's good enough. If they get to what's good enough, then move on. But don't kind of move them on for the sake of it.
But I think you've done a reverse process with Sophie. You've looked at what you want at the end of the process. You've looked at the start of the process, and you've worked your way back.
That's how it looks on here. What I had to do with Sophie was to understand the capability of the athlete. And I never, so those first 3 years, literally, and I genuinely mean this, baby steps. Do something, get it right, move on. I didn't know where the end result was, because I didn't know at what point I was going to get to all the poor learned movement being gone and me being left with poor movement because of her cerebral palsy. I never knew where that point was. I only think I got to that point this year when I seen her run her sub 26 for 200. I honestly felt at that point there is now an athlete there that I can really now just focus on training as an athlete. Still have to do all the basic fundamentals, going back, hurdle walkovers, walking with a pole above head, all that kind of thing has to be embedded because that's fundamental. Doing the fundamentals regularly is really important. So I never knew where the end game was. And I don't mean...
You when you were there?
I think, you know, when I said sometimes it's good enough, I think where Sophie is now is good enough. The bit on that force velocity curve where that strength speed is now the bit where Sam will have to, because it's not me that goes and does it, Sam is the S&C coach, Sam is going to have to go away and really think about how do I get either the movements, the Olympic movements that I want for that athlete to do, and I think me and Sam agree that's going to be a real struggle, or how do I put something in its place with the way the athlete moves that allows them to get the benefits of doing an Olympic lift. Physical characteristics underpin sprint performance. That's exactly the same whether you've got a neurological disorder or not. Again, just so this is Sophie down here. So Sophie's cadence was always very, very quick, but she never applied much force. So the thing about trying to teach Sophie was that, A, we did have to make her heavier, because like I said, at one stage she was 44 kilos. We did have to, and the goal was 48. She now regularly weighs 48. I don't know what it'll be like if she gets to 50. I don't know whether it'll be too much or, but, so that's just a general slide. You know, the athlete's ability to produce increased levels of force at maximum velocity. And that doesn't matter whether you've got CP or not. That's what you're trying to do with any athlete. Once they get to that maximal speed, can they still produce force? Or do they become the road runner and their legs just churn over and they don't actually go anywhere? Stride length over stride frequency, what we spoke about. So again, I used the hurdle stuff. How does this differ to athletes with cerebral palsy? So you can see there, so this was Sophie very early on. That's how she bends. If you ask her to squat, she can't do a back squat. That's how Sophie squats. If we get her to do a front squat, she gets herself into a much nicer position and she can sit through that. As you see, and from early on, we kind of taught her that we can't get her to do a back squat because literally she'll get to here and she'll just tilt. Some exercises like this. So this is what's really interesting. So there's no specific disease normalities within the muscle fibre of an athlete with CP. The muscle fibres, there's no kind of specific disease in there, but predominantly athletes with CP have got more type 1 fibres. So type 1 fibre are not your fast twitch fibres. Yeah. And there's much less type 2. So we've already said that an athlete with cerebral palsy has got the neurological pathway is poor. But it's not rocket science then, it's not telling us that and that. We probably couldn't have sat down and figured it out ourselves. Because that pathway is poor, for that to be really quick, it's not getting the muscle, it's not getting the signal. So this is where the heated stuff comes in. Because now I'm going to get everything neurologic firing much better, because now I've got heat and now I've got neurological firing, so it really helps. So this is all based on, and this is on the internet, you can go and have a look at this. So spastic muscle fibres, 1/3 of the size of normal fibres. 40% of plastic bundle was contractile tissue and 60% extracellular matrix. So do apologise. So an able-bodied athlete, 95% extracellular matrix. That's what the muscle tissue is made up of. 40% drop, nearly, if an athlete has got CP. And it's smaller, much smaller tissue. So that's, again, it's not amazing news, but what it is telling you is that the muscle tissue doesn't get that neurological input as quick as someone that hasn't got cerebral palsy. So there's a reduced 30%. So if we go back to there, 1/3 the size of muscle tissue, there's a 30% drop in power. 67% of the sprint power of an able-bodied athlete, 89% of peak power of VO2 max. Ironically, the VO2 max is not really that much different to an able-bodied athlete.
You would expect that.
Yeah, because it's the muscle tissue that's
letting them die.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
VO2 max is just about the same. And that's why I kind of popped up. Don't put in half of the effort unless you're okay with half of the results. Because actually, you should be still able to go and do stuff. You just have to get to the point where I know I'm going to have an athlete, if they've got cerebral palsy, that's going to need some sort of assistance from we live in Ireland or in England, and it's cold 6 months of the year. Unless you're at the Mary Peters track, and then it's cold for 11 months and 2 weeks of the year. Those are the 2 weeks it's raining, but it's warm rain. So you can still go and get some of these athletes to work hard, but you have to understand, where does that fatigue kick in? At what point will that athlete then start turning over really poorly? So now I'm promoting poor learned behaviour rather than good learned behaviour. And like I said, I've got last year's plan that I can show you, which splits out very much. So my group are predominantly 100, 200 and 400 metre runners. So your group's probably the same, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, decreased muscle volume and the type of muscle fibres. Increased amount of energy usage due to overcome muscle tone. So like I said, if I was working my quads, my hamstrings would be fairly relaxed. If you're working your quads, your hamstrings are going to be like this, because they're trying to stabilise your knee. And everything's just working. So the energy that you use is massively different. Coordination issues due to velocity dependent on spasticity. Yeah. So if you're a T35 athlete, you would expect coordination to be a lot worse. If you're a T38 athlete, you'd expect to be milder, as we've seen from when we were explaining the difference between a 35, 36, 37, 38. And increased muscle contraction and muscle control. Okay, so toning. Not going to go into that. So what new approaches will I take? What considerations for training will I take forward into the build-up into Tokyo 2012? So we already know that there's reduced force and there's a reduced power. So it's about narrowing that gap. So how do I narrow the gap between the affected side and the non-affected side? Go back. So again, this is Sophie Hahn. Just trying to get her to do some basic movements, trying to get her to keep her heels on the floor. Increased force production. So recruitment to being able to recruit the correct muscles. So we said about Sean Burrows. So we know that Sean Burrows has issues with his hamstrings simply because of his CP and the way the forwarding works. And the neural forwarding, because of the way he moves, he's going to potentially have bad hamstrings all his life when he tries to run. It's just about how much work can we put in to try and reduce that. It's what we've been told is that if someone has 2 hamstring tears in the exact same place, they've got 48% likelihood of re-tearing that again. That's massive. That's nearly career over. Because, you know, I would guess at some stage that's going to go again. So looking at motor patterns and effective co-activation, so anything that we can do to just get really good basic movement. So again, we had to get Sophie to do this. She had to hang onto a bar because she couldn't do that. You can see her holding onto the bar. So again, she's got the same colour top on as we said. So this, she'd already broke 2 world records at that point. What you can't do is move the athlete on. You have to get them to do the really basic stuff. I mean, now she doesn't need a bar. She can front squat 85k and she can bound over hurdles that height.
Sam, that's the good side.
I never realised how Dublin I am until I hear myself talking. So, transfer of force, interaction with the ground, so helping we get to transfer the force into the ground and force a high velocity. That's just the simple stuff that we do in training. So some of the stuff that Sophie's done, we know that she can produce some real force now, because we can see on some of the data that's come through when she's gone through OptiJump. So we had data from about 3 years ago, and you can just see, so those strides per second have changed considerably. I haven't got the original data, unfortunately. Training design methods and adjustments. So sound functional movements with as much, it says increased control actually. What you want is as much control as you can possibly get within the capability of that athlete because of cerebral palsy or because of the neurological issue that they've got. Develop force production through key lifts. So again, looking at your time scale, but what lifts is that individual capable of doing? So what can they do? What can you get them to do at that point that will give you what you want to get? Plyometric and or Olympic lift variations. So like I said, if I can't get the Olympic lifts in, Sam will go away and he'll come up with something that allows us to get what we want. So some of the Superman stuff that we do on the pole vault bed, you know, throwing balls and stuff, that helps. So we just kind of put in what we can. Can we achieve overload through variations, dumbbell snatch, jump squats, etc. Neurological conditions. So how is the neuro system affected by CP and the impact of tone levels on strength training? So generally with CP, so with Sam Ruddock, so Sam Ruddock was a T35. Actually, he didn't really get a lot else that came along with that. So he didn't have any intellectual impairment. He didn't have any issues with his eyesight. He didn't have any hearing issues. It was kind of, I mean, I think he's got 3 degrees now. He's very intelligent. He goes to, but his spasticity is, you know, is very high. So it depends on what comes along with that you have to deal with, that you have to consider that. So if we look at some of the athletes that we've got, so Livy Breen, so she gets a lot of that involuntary movement. I think she's a 38. I think she's a bottom end 38. I think she's a 38. Paul Blake. He's a 37? 36. So again, if you talk to Paul, Paul's got a lot of involuntary movement. Yeah.
As when you're talking to him?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But he runs well?
Oh yeah, he does. He's moved to Cardiff now, I think.
It has been for a while now. What's the guy, Morris as well? What's Steve Morris?
Steve Morris, teetotaler.
Yes, yeah.
Different,
Lovely man.
different ball game.
Yeah, fruitcake, lovely man though. So there's a lot of stuff. So there's about the role of nutrition. So I've already said your energy output is massive compared to the energy output of anyone that's on the Olympic pathway, just simply because of the way your body works. It's going to be a higher energy output.
Well, can I ask you this? In terms of energy output and things like that, how do you provide more energy for your body without putting on weight?
So that comes down to the type of nutrition that you're putting into your system.
Okay, yeah.
So if you go down and go, I've worked really hard today, can I have a double fish and chips with some curry sauce and some mushy peas?
That's nice.
Do you know? Do you know what? Well, actually, if you make some really good decisions around how am I going to fuel my body,
Yeah.
and that's the same for anybody,
Yeah.
you know, any athlete. It's about how you fuel your system.
Can you suggest anything that helps that doesn't?
Well, I would speak to you. I'm not a nutritionist, but what we did, so with Sophie Han going into Rio, because there was a real issue around kind of how she was and what her energy levels was like. I know British Athletics used a company called Soul Foods, I think they're called, and they literally gave Sophie meals for about 3 months. This is our training plan. This is what we're doing. This is what you're going to eat. This is when you're eating it.
You could perhaps look at gels even during the course of it.
Yeah, they can be, gels can be, if you tolerate them, they're all right, but they can be a bit sicky.
I've heard say my more.
So there's lots of stuff that you can do. You know, a feed effects on CP, how long between sessions. Now there's an interesting thing. So we've already said about at what point does an athlete with cerebral palsy break down. That is absolutely down to you monitoring your athlete and going, now they're broke. I now have to give them a rest. So some CP athletes, so you do marathons. At what point do you break? Yeah. So what point did you break down when you did marathons?
During the race for training. Well, training, my first 22 miler was the best run I've ever had in my life over the long distance. But when I was doing the marathon, I had 16, 17 mile. Because I went faster than I was doing in training, my legs didn't want me to go up that hill, so I ended up walking. And then literally just hit that bar.
Yeah.
Where the second one was completely different.
So that sounds like you didn't follow the plan.
No, I went too fast their way. And
Yeah. So that would be the same for any athlete, whether they got CP or
I
not.
deny all knowledge of this.
At what, Roger, Eve, at what point when you're doing stuff do you see Eve starting to kind of break down and kind of lose?
Well, it varies depending on the session. So the longer the distance and the faster it is, the quicker she'll break down. But equally, we just started this year doing longer runs, like sort of 45-second runs for the first time. And she copes fine for a while and then starts to...
So he said, so at what point do you see that start to break down then?
You see the technique getting worse, basically.
So is the first run okay?
Yeah.
Second one?
Yeah. It's usually then, like at the moment we're doing 3 sets of 3,
Right.
45 seconds. So on the third run she'll start to feel it a bit. And then there's a break. So then she's recovered for the next set.
So from your coach's eye, how much of that is, actually I've just got an athlete that just, I'm trying to make stronger, or how much of that is neurologically, and I'm going to guess it's probably cold because we're in Northern Ireland. So how much of that is cold?
Yeah. Because
you're starting to tone, which then massively promotes really poor technique.
Well, the difficulty is I don't know which is which.
Okay.
This is the first few weeks she's been doing that this year for the longer runs. I could tell better on the faster runs, but on the longer runs, because she hasn't done it before, I have nothing to measure it against, so I can't really tell.
Okay.
I'm just pushing her through, trying to get to finish them. Whereas before, if she said, I'm starting to feel tired or it's getting really tough, I would have let her off with it, whereas now I'm sort of know her a bit better and I will say, right.
I would have let her off with it. So for you, I think I asked you, do you have any kind of shakes or anything that you get? At what point would you get really shaky?
Like the third ones. I'd start to get really shaky after that third one.
So would you, because you're seeing that, would you change anything with that?
I'll maybe let her sit one out if necessary.
Okay.
Usually what you can see is she kind of zones out. And you can see that she's kind of not quite there with you if you're talking to her. And then that's usually a sign that she...
So I was just going to say, because that's exactly the first time that I met you and you had a, what do you want to call it, an attack or whatever you want to call it, or... Seizure. That's exactly what you done the very first time I met you. Because we'd done a couple of short sprints, hadn't we? And then she had to lie down on the mat. But the first thing that we noticed was she kind of went,
Yeah.
I am not in this room anymore. So I think you... It's at that point you kind of look and go, well, how much benefit is that athlete going to have from doing that last one?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not telling you how to run your session.
No,
it was just a talking
I'm
point.
trying to learn as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing. It's really about learning about your athlete, because, like I said, with CP, they're all every single one of them are individuals from a CP point of view. Because you're not going to get two athletes. This is part of the problem with classification, if you like. You know, you get eight people in the final of a race at a World Championships, and you know, I watched Eve run at Notwell, and she smashed it to bits, and the girl that came last is probably wondering, well, she's a bit quick, isn't she? Yeah, because she's talented. That's why she's probably worked really hard. You know, that's where you get that's why the CP or the neurological classes sometimes can be so diverse, because it's a bit like being a boxer. So if as a boxer you can weigh in, I don't know, at a 12.2 or 12.7 as a light heavy, but someone else can weigh 11.13. or 12. So you can have a massive difference. And it's a bit like that when they categorise for classification. There is a top and bottom that people fit into. Some are at the bottom, some are at the top, some of them are around the middle. Training methods, some wearable resistance. You can get the wearable resistance that you can wear around your legs. I don't particularly use them, but using velocity-based training. I'm not teaching you anything that you hadn't seen. Any questions? Any questions?
Maybe the difference between winter training and in-season training.
Okay. All right. I can look at, and the reason that I say I can look at it because I was looking at it when I was in the gym, so I've still got it open as a tab down the bottom down here actually. So this is what we kind of had up to the 26th of November. This was last year. Can you see that? So you've got a quarter miler group. It's a bit that switches you on, isn't it? And so you can see up here SH, Sophie Han. So even though she's part of that group, actually, we were having to do something different because of once you go past a certain point with Sophie, or with Sean Burrows, or with Ben Fulston that's in the group, or with Tom Young that's now in the group, and he hasn't got CP, he's got a thing called NF1, which comes across very much like CP, but fatigue levels really drop off. So, Sophie Han, so like I said, around her fourth or fifth 150, she'd really start to lose form. 150 times 3 off 90 seconds. Okay, so that's still a tough session, but what I'm doing is I'm planning the session within the capability of that individual so that I can get them to maintain form, maintain some composure in how to run, but still stretch them, really push them. So in that I'm still getting 450 metres out of the athlete. Well, all I'm doing is saying I'm just going to take a bit more time to get the volume that I want. They'd have 6 or 8 minutes rest, probably 6 minutes rest. During that 6 minutes rest, Sophie would go into the high pack, pull her heated pants on, and sit there for that 6 minutes Yeah. And then during that 6 minutes, about every 3 minutes, so she'd get 2 in, she'd do a couple of jumps, not 5, which is what we'd normally get her to do, but just to stand up, just a couple of jumps, just to keep her farting. Then she'd go back out and do another 3, come back in, same process again. But everything is based around the capability of that athlete being able to run correctly with the correct form, or the correct form that's right for them. Because remember, these athletes have got cerebral palsy, so there's going to be a certain amount of movement that you're going to see that because of CP you're not going to get rid of. Oh, that went off. Switch on. My watch switches on. How clever is that? Yeah, so that varies quite a bit. So a lot of this stuff, like I said, it was based around what we wanted Sophie to go and achieve. So you can see there. So, but that doesn't mean that Sophie didn't have, so this 60-second run. So Sophie still did that. But I trained her to do that through doing this. Because if I was saying to her, right, you're going to run, I don't know, the same as what this group is doing down here, where you're doing 300, 200 times 2 times 3. Do you know what? She's going to, halfway through that, her adductors, so with Sophie, what's happening to her, oh, feck off. Her, sorry, I swore. Her adductors would get, I forgot. Her adductors would get really sore. And then the next day, she'd have to go in to physio and have her hip adjusted. So one of the key things for athletes with CP as well is that, looking at you here, is that you have to go in and get monitored and get adjusted, because you don't know what's affecting you if you don't go and get checked. Specifically, so the athletes with CP, because of the way the muscle fibres don't work as we'd expect them to, they've got reduced output. Yeah, we know they don't create as much force, so your body is now compensating to go and do something else, trying to get you to do what you want to do. It massively affects you. So you going in and getting that little bit of treatment makes a huge difference. Also means when the physio that sees you may go, you need to go away. Have I got some of them on here? How are we doing for time, Tom?
Take a few more questions and then we can hit.
Okay. It's really hard for me to see. What I'll try and do is I'll send him to Tom so you can see him, because I can't find him on there. Sophie'd go in to see the physio and she would walk out with a battery of small exercises for stability, correct posture. Some of the stuff that I seen Laura doing with you downstairs. So that's exactly where Sophie Hand started, doing really mundane, basic exercise. Because you know, if you don't do the basic fundamentals, you may find it doesn't affect you for 2 years or 3 years, but at some point you'll get to the point where you'll be strong and you'll be able to produce force. But because you've not done the basic fundamentals, something will break. And it's really difficult to go all the way back and start learning those fundamentals again. So if your coach is doing fundamentals with you, you're doing, you know, get to see the physio, get adjusted, get moved, wherever you need. Any more questions? Then we'll go and get Eve to throw up that wrap that she had.
Can you just talk us through your typical week quickly for Sophie, just how her different sessions work through the week?
Yeah, so circuits. Okay, so in there, basic functional movements. There's a lot of med ball work in there. We use some fat mats for people to go and run on. You can't get Sophie to do abdominal rollouts because she's so lordotic. So we get her to do something different. So that circuit specifically around looking at what I'd call basic movement. Those 4 150s is just literally to get them out on the track. They go to them, it's off 2 minutes. I'd probably expect them to go around in about 26, 28 seconds. So it was just a loosener. Drills in gym Tuesday, everything was around balance and control. then she'd go into the gym and do some basic functional movements with Sam. Wednesday, so again, this is November, so it's not untypical to see a bit volume high, etc. 150s, 8 150s off 90 seconds, that's tough. So specifically for Sophie in there, she'd get to that, probably do the fourth one, and I'd pull her out and she would only do the last 3 because she needs the extra rest. Thursday, physio. She's literally, so here she goes to see the physio straight after here. So this is the morning sessions. This starts at 9:30. The drills last, it's drills before she goes into the gym. I'm going to say there's probably an hour and 10 minutes. She's probably in the gym for another 40, 50 minutes. Then she's up to see the physio. They check her over. Sometimes she'll come down and go, yeah, there's nothing wrong. Jog on. Thursday is a day off. Friday is the same as this. You can see here, it's just not in there. Friday is the same as this. Same format. Drills, gym, physio. Saturday, bit of a gutsy session because they have Sunday off. So she's seen Sam, S&C coach, twice a week, working on good functional movement, getting the basic movement right. And sometimes we weren't getting the basic movement right, but the good thing was, I'm sure you get the option to do this, is go down onto the track and have a look at the athlete.
All the time.
Get the physio to go down on the track, have a chat with the physio on the track and go, what do you think? And see what, because those 4 pair of eyes or 6 pair of eyes as the S&C coach come down to watch the athlete. And it's only got to be 10 minutes. Can you watch them do some basic drills, stepping over hurdles, wherever it is? And then between the 3 of you can go, well, what can we go away to do? The S&C bloke says, well, I'm going to go and do this. The physio says, well, they need to come in and see me because I need to make sure this and this is right. And you as a coach then can have an athlete come to you that 66% of the work that you want to do is already being done for you, and you can focus on what you want to do on the track. And that's I suppose that's the benefit of being able to work in a facility to where I am at Loughborough. But you've got a similar opportunity here to be able to go and do that. Does that answer your question?
Does, yeah.
Any other questions? No? Did you get coffee?
Yeah. Had to go by
God.
myself, go downstairs.
What I'm going to do is that presentation and any of the information, in fact, I think it may have already sent to you. It went Bing, so I'm presuming it was sent to you. Any of the videos that you want, or that of any of the athletes, if you want, and you've just said, I'll just send you what I've got. It's in the public domain, so you can just have whatever you want. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So what we spoke about upstairs about balance and stuff, that's all I look for on this. Quite often with athletes with cerebral palsy, not so much with neurological conditions, but athletes with cerebral palsy. Sometimes, if you ask that question, are you aware of where your knees when you do that? No? Where do you think it is? I think it's there, but it's actually over here when I show you the video. You're absolutely not aware of where it is.
So even just getting them to do that in front of a mirror makes it hell of a lot.
Do you understand where your knee is supposed to be? Do you want to show where your knee is supposed to be? Sorry. No, honestly no. So you try and get your knees over your toes. So what I say to people generally, if you feel as though you're kind of pushing hard away, you kind of stabilise stuff. Try that. So you're really trying to push your feet away. So you're trying to push your feet apart. Now squat. Push your feet apart. So a knee will stay out in that position. What you do is just forcing it out. Do you use something similar or a band?
Yeah, we would, or awareness.
And there's a number of different things that you can do. So actually it's what's fine. Because he might not like doing that all the time. He might go and use a band and chill and go, oh, I feel like I'm pushing against that. That's my preferred way of doing it. So I explore the different things that you can get them to do. Single leg quarter squat, hold hands out neutral, spine staying on. What a right. How long do you do that for? Sorry, say that again. Do you want to pick up and then I'll come up?
Other side as well.
So just so you know, when you hear what we spoke about, stabilise my
Side. Go.
If you want to see what I've seen before, you stand alone.
Do that 2 on each side.
Yeah. You know what this is for, Ian? Exactly, your feet with it, you don't do it right.
Toe touches, 12.
So another thing, I mean, I know it might not be comfortable for me, but walk around the athlete, have a look at it from all different angles, because quite often what you see from one point of view is very different from what you see from the other. What would you do? If you had an athlete, you wanted them to do that and you couldn't do that. Yeah. And that's the really key thing about working with someone that's got cerebral palsy. It is about you looking, going, do you know what? I'd love them to be able to do that, and they can't do that. So how could I get them to do that? Oh well, you know what to do. Well, because you won't always have an SSC coach. So quite often, kind of what's in your mind, well, I can still get the athlete to do what I want them to do.
Stiff-legged skips the next one, so people just go from.
Oh, look, they're not that cold now, eh?
Just go from here onto the stiff-legged skip.
You do that on part of your warm-up. That's just so stable, isn't it?
So the difference in that one is just getting a bit more force through the ground, a bit more negative, but speed. Come a long way.
Stable, mate. That's really good.
Reverse lunge, 8 each side. See on this side, that knee. Keep it.
Can you see that way?
That's it, yeah, see?
Now, can you do it?
She can do it.
Now, there's a really good point. If you go around and correct the athlete, sometimes you find out very quickly whether they just can't do it or not.
One more time, Ian. Watch it. Watch it.
So now, that's called learned movement. So I know we can get rid of that out of what she's doing. So you then start to promote that really good movement. Hey. I didn't even have to. Oh, he's got a camera on. Brilliant. Get that.
Yep, so skip again. Kneeling hip hinges, 12. Yeah, this is what she would do this on track before she does sort of accelerations. And then the gym. Possibly get some information on maybe some plans first.
Yeah.
She does have plans in her program, but not to start.
So some of the reasons that you'll see with that knee not working correctly, quite often people will look at that and that's a symptom of something else. So I think the reason that Eve's knee does that is because her glute med doesn't work correctly, or it's certainly not firing at the minute. So the tendency is for that knee to drop in. Whereas once you put her in the correct position, she's able to hold it and maintain it. So there are a battery of exercises that an athlete can do to switch on the glute med, and then that will give them much better functional movement.
Standing tilts. So it's just standing pelvic tilts.
Yeah.
It's just more about Eve just finding the neutral position, pelvic wise, turning on them.
So with a lot of sprinters, it's not unusual to see this kind of lordosis that's here, very pronounced with CP athletes that are sprinters. That becomes even more pronounced. So Sophie Hand's picture, when you see what you couldn't bend, it becomes very obvious, and you can see it there on Eve as well. So that exercise is really good for that.
We're pretty much on the jumps now, unless you want to do anything with her, the hurdle walks or anything. You can do the jumps.
No, do these jumps for us. Let's go through.
We'll move down there because it's the same distance. We'll just move down a bit so the lines are standing.
Quite often with athletes with cerebral palsy, not so much with a neurological condition, but athletes with cerebral palsy, sometimes if you ask that question, are you aware of where your knees when you do that? They go, oh. Where do you think it is? I think it's there, but it's actually over here when I show you the video from it. You're absolutely not aware of where it is.
So even just getting them to do that in front of her makes it hell of a lot.
Then, do you understand where your knee is supposed to be? Do you want to show where your knee is supposed to be?
You're not sure.
Sorry, you said you know. Honestly, no. So you try to do this over the toes. So what I say to people generally, do you feel as though you're kind of pushing carpet away, you kind of stabilise stuff? Like that. So you're really trying to push your feet away. So you kind of push your feet apart and then squat. Push your feet apart. So a knee will stay out in that position because what you do is you're forcing it out. Would you use something similar or a band?
Yeah, we would, or just band it to give awareness and loads of things. Yeah.
And there's a number of different things that you can do. So actually, it's worth finding because Eve might not like doing that all the time. He might go and use a band and she might go, oh, I feel like I'm pushing against that. That's my preferred way of doing it. So explore the different things that you can get them to do. Single leg quarter squat, hold the hands out neutral, spine staying on. How long do you do that for? Sorry, say that again? pick up and then on to walk around.
20, yeah, it's very small. 20 seconds. Yeah. Other side as well?
So just so you know, when you do on the sculpture, to stay away from that. Yeah. If you want to see her, when I seen her 4 years ago, she couldn't stand them on there. She did massive improvements.
Do that with 2 on each side.
Yeah. You know what this is for here?
Oh no.
Exactly, get beaten with it if you don't do it right.
Toe touches, 12.
So another thing, I mean, I know it might not be comfortable for me, but walk around the athlete, have a look at it from all different angles. Because quite often what you see from one point of view is very different from what you see from the other.
Would there be an exercise that you could do before that to lead into that, to progress into that? You know, like use a stability ball against the wall.
What would you do? If you had an athlete, you wanted them to do that and you couldn't do that?
I would put a stability ball up against the wall and have them do that, and then maybe progress.
And that's the really key thing about working with someone that's got cerebral palsy. It is about you looking going, do you know what? I'd love them to be able to do that, and they can't do that. So how could I get them to do that? Oh well, you know what I do. Because you won't always have an S&C coach you can go and go look and need to do this. So quite often, kind of what's in your mind, well I can still get the athlete to do what I want them to do.
So people just
Oh look, you're not that cold now, yeah.
forward to the step like a size.
Start off stuff from leg.
So stable.
The difference now is just getting that more force.
The stable, mate, that's really good.
Reverse lunge, 80%.
September off, October is really like it, and it's pretty much constant. Until she takes the position right really, and then eases off. Yes, there's competition.
Yeah, the side even. That
Can you see that?
physically.
No, thank you.
In ways it's difficult. Yeah, I mean,
If you go around and correct the athlete, sometimes you find out very quickly whether they just can't do it or not. So now, that's called lead movement. So I know we can get rid of that out of what she's doing. So you then start promote that really good movement. I didn't even know. Oh, he's got a camera.
Yeah, to skip again.
reasons that you'll see that knee not working correctly. Quite often people will look at that and that's a symptom of something else. So I think the reason that Eve's knee does is because a glute knee doesn't work correctly, or it's certainly not firing at the minute. So the tendency is for that knee to drop into it. Whereas once you put her in the correct position, she's able to hold and maintain it. So there are a battery of exercises, and that we can do to switch on the glute knee, and then that will give us a much better functional movement.
It's just more about you just finding the neutral position.
So with a lot of strength, it's not unusual to see this on a low doses that's very pronounced with CP athletes that are sprinters. That becomes even more pronounced. So Sophie Hand's picture when you see what she's doing then, and it becomes very, and you can see it there on Eve as well. So that exercise is really good for that.
Move down there because it's the same distance. Facing that way? Yeah. Do one facing the window.
That's pretty good, I think, isn't it? I'm not giving you any more compliments.
You probably know the rationale behind Next one is pogo jump, but it's done to a different rhythm, so I clap a rhythm and Eve has to react to that. We'll see. Okay, pogos, ready? 2, 1. Okay. We're going to do 3 sets and we'll vary it.
So when she's doing the next set, so what I'm really impressed about is what Eve used to do was jump and be like a ballet dancer when she jumps. And now you can see she's trying to do this and then push away with a mid foot. And you can see that because the hip is really pushing into the area she does it. So that's really good. So, and the idea for this, so running is about rhythm. So it's just about getting things to the right tempo. It's basically kind of the pole above her head, and she'll go straight leg, low knee, high knee, but the rhythm should stay exactly the same even though she's changing leg position. Okay? And again, you're just promoting kind of really good rhythm in everything they're trying to do. Cool. So I've put the poles down. I'm going to start back there. Pole above the head. Straighten it. Slowly. So again, so the rhythm doesn't get any quicker as you go through each one. You okay with that? Come on. Remember, you have to set the pole up this without rhythm. So it's a nice and push it up. Push nice and tall. That's it. So nice one. So again, what we're trying to do is not have a change in speed when it goes from the low knee to the high knee, so it's about control. What you should hear is a really nice contact with the floor. So slow it down a bit, Eve. No rush. Push it nice and tall. When you're ready. Good. So you can see that rhythm of that was quite good. The thing about getting the pole above the head is she now has to walk from here down. And so we can then start removing some of that poor learned behaviour because she has to focus from here. I better have that back. And then you're okay to go with some hurdles. Yeah. We'll just get some of these hurdles. So we're getting to do some walkovers without the pole, and then we'll make it more challenging with the pole. Isn't that it? So just step over, and down, keep the toe in the air. Toe here. I want you to keep the toe here and push into the floor. So even when you get into the floor, keep it. There you go. So basically all you're doing is really challenging. So what you're trying to do is when they're on this stable leg, get them to really be able to promote. You know we said about that, it's also where they're really, really shaking. So how much of that can you reduce? Because a lot of that will be poor length. I want you to hold it a bit longer before you put your foot down. Hold it a bit longer. Same thing again with the pole. We're going to do the same thing again and take away some of that movement that's not across the shoulder. So let's hear your foot on the floor. Nice feeling contact. Push the bar nice and high. Hold it. Hold it. Hold it. And down. Hold it. And down. So now she's controlling the top half of her body because she's using the pole, and she's now got more control in the bottom half. And it's more stable. So these are the same exercises we do every day. No different, doesn't matter what level we're at. Do you do these as your warm-up, Roger?
I wouldn't do these as warm-up, I would do them as part of the session on Sunday usually. Not so much this time of year, but starting in December we do this for everyone. The rest we do it over full-size hurdles, different heights, and we do it over these.
Does she do them with your parents or the shoulder?
We'll do some of them bouncing, not over that sort of. Well, I don't know. Like 2 foot bounds over.
No.
Oh, this area.
Thank you. Eve, how do you feel about doing them with a little bit of rhythm, with a little bit of a tap? On all this. Go on, give it a go, see what happens. We'll be fine. Of course, I'm not exactly the other one as well. You can make it much more challenging in all the different directions. Really? Right, we're going to give it a miss. We're going to finish it there. Thank you very much, Ian. So anything that you can do to challenge, so you can see there's just a lot of poor lane movement. All that stuff is coachable. You'll never get rid of so that bit of involuntary, that shaking that you get. You're not going to get rid of it. That is there. But you can challenge the poor movement. You can challenge the fact that what Eve's body is taught to do over the years is to do other stuff to compensate. You have to strip all that back. And just be, and to be fair to Roger, when I seen Eve 4 years ago, well, we had the little baby hurdles, didn't we? And she couldn't step over them. And the fact that she can do them and do lots of other stuff is absolutely incredible. So credit to Roger and the people up here to what they've done. So have you got any questions? No? All right, thank you very much.